Hi, my name's Jan. I'm one of the co-founders of Leaderpreneur, and I wanted to just introduce our first video to you. So firstly, a little bit about Leaderpreneur. It's about the concept of a 21st century leader, combining leadership, management, and entrepreneurship skills. What that means in practice is the skill to unite people to work together, to cope with change and achieve goals. That's leadership skills. Management skills, organizing complex processes to optimize performance. Entrepreneurship skills, creating innovation in uncertain times. So by synthesizing these three skill sets along with a systems worldview, we believe it's possible to build a 21st century leader. And that's why we ask ourselves, once we have the idea of the 21st century leader, how do we actually go about building great 21st century leaders? And our approach is to take the idea that the toughest training builds the best possible leaders. And so that's why we pride ourselves on building programs that are tough, but the reward comes at the end, because by overcoming our programs, you enhance your skill set significantly. We provide programs in three key areas. That's leadership programs for organizations and upgrading their high potential programs, leadership programs for universities that improve student employability and entrepreneurship, and online programs, which you're experiencing right now. All of our programs are designed to be as clear, practical, and powerful as possible. We think it's important to take a praxis approach. That means theory-informed action. We take the best of 21st century science and make it into the most practical and easy to understand tools so that you can go out right away and start using them to be a better 21st century leader. I mentioned 21st century science. What is that? So we have taken the approach of differentiating ourselves from the traditional 20th century management science approach, because we believe that's an outdated way of thinking from a world that no longer exists. Instead, we look to systems science and complexity science, and we use these 21st century technologies to provide you with cutting-edge learning. So the science that powers this learning module in communication is called cybernetics. It's the science of communication and control. Don't worry, you won't have to learn too much about the details of the science, but what you do need to know is that it's incredibly powerful and exciting. What you're going to learn in this first video is the incredible idea of the control cycle and how 5 key activities drive all control in the whole world. Why does that matter, and what does that have to do with communication? Well, the advanced idea behind communication skills is that it's much more than just simply transmitting information. It's about using information to achieve goals. And so what you're going to learn is how you can go about organizing the flow of information in an effective way to be successful in today's complex, uncertain, and volatile world.
Why do leaders communicate? The simple answer is leaders communicate to achieve goals. If we don't communicate, then we cannot achieve our goals. It's as simple as that. The reason why communication is so important in today's world is that we need to maximize the flow of information in order to make sure that we're effectively setting goals, creating plans, and implementing those plans. Leaders who have poor communication skills are unable to ensure that their teams have the information they need to be successful. It's as simple as that. Communication is about information flow and making sure that the right information flows in the right way to achieve success. So, where do you go in order to build an effective communications module? Well, we believe that what really matters is communication and control. And so that's why we've looked at the science of cybernetics, which conveniently is the science of communication and control. You're going to learn lots about it, but don't worry. We've actually worked really hard to make sure that the complexities of the science have been translated into very clear, very practical, and very powerful tools that you can use straight away. So it's important for you to know that under the hood of all the frameworks that we present to you is a really powerful and interesting science, but you don't need to get engaged with that if all you want to do is just focus on using the practical tools that we provide to you and make sure you can get on with improving your team's performance. There are 5 activities that need to be performed in order to project control and achieve goals. The important thing to recognize is that anything that wants to achieve goals, whether it's animals hunting their prey, whether it's the air conditioning unit that's regulating the temperature of the environment, whether it's you leading your team, whether it's the American government, or whether it's the United Nations, anything that's trying to achieve goals must have a control cycle in place. And this is why we think this is such a powerful science, because it reveals the fundamentals that need to be in place in order to be successful. So what are these 5 activities? The first is always setting goals. If we don't have goals, then there's nothing to achieve. The second is planning how to achieve the goals. Then it's about communicating the plan, implementing the plan, and then learning and observing about how the world has changed so we can update the planning process and go around the cycle again. As you can see, it's a continuous cycle. That means that if we want to maintain control, we must be continuously performing these 5 activities. We have to go round and round and round the control cycles. We lose control when we don't effectively go around the control cycle, or when we don't perform one of the 5 activities properly. So the simple point for you to understand is that if you want to achieve your goals, then you need to have these 5 activities put in place. And we can see that with a simple example from the world of the military. So the modern military today, if there is a war, make great efforts to try and destroy the enemy's control facilities. Why is that? Because the command and control centers issue the orders and directions to the army. They, if we look at the control cycle, set the goals. It's where the planning activity takes place. It's where they send out communications to tell the troops how to respond to change. And it's also where they're learning about what's happening in the environment and integrating that into the planning process. You can see that if you destroy the command and control center of the enemy, it cannot perform 4 crucial activities for the control cycle. And the result of that means that you might have an extremely powerful army, you might have thousands of tanks and so on, but if you can't properly direct them, then they're going to be helpless. And here we see a very important difference between power and control, because power is the ability to effect change, whereas control is the ability to direct it. And so we need both power and control. But of the two, control is usually more important because power on its own just is about changing things and is usually about destruction. Whereas when we have control, we can direct that change towards achieving our goals. So in summary, what is the key point? You need to have a control cycle to achieve your goals. It's as simple as that. No matter what you do, you're going to need to have goals. So we're going to look at the example of a football manager because we like to keep things simple here and we feel it's something that everyone everywhere can understand. So imagine that the football manager wants to achieve the goal of winning the championship. So he sets the goal of winning the championship. And then he moves to step 2, planning how to achieve the goals. He then needs to move to step 3 and inform others about the plan. If he doesn't do that, then all it remains is a good idea in his head. He actually has to communicate to the players, the staff, the fans, and everybody else what the plan is to win the championship. And then step 4, he needs to make sure that the plan is actually being effectively implemented. It's not just being talked about, it's actually being done. And then step 5, he needs to make sure he's learning about how the world is changing, because you can't just perform the plan. The world is always changing. You need to respond to new opportunities, new threats, new challenges. And so he needs to take that knowledge, and then we see the control cycle closes, because what happens is you take that learning and you then come back to the planning activity. You use that learning to think, okay, how has the world changed? I'm still trying to win the championship, but now I see, for example, one of my top players is injured, or we found a really successful strategy and we should actually change the way we do things to incorporate that strategy more. The point is that you never stand still. You're always moving round and round the control cycle. So let's keep this practical. What do you need to do right now? Here we have a tool for you that provides a very simple step for explaining what you need to do to make sure you have clarity around your control cycle. Step 1 is answer this. Are you setting goals effectively for your team? This is always the first step. If goals are not clear, there's no point in doing anything else. You have to start with a clear goal. Secondly, once you have goals in place, are they being planned for effectively? Are you engaging in an effective planning process? Step 3, you might have a clear goal, you might have a great plan, but are you effectively communicating them? Or is too much getting lost in translation? Are people confused about what they need to achieve? It's very important to emphasize the need for effective communication in terms of distributing the information to others to make sure they actually understand it. Step 4, once the information has been distributed and everyone knows what they're meant to be doing, then you need to make sure it's actually being done appropriately. And that is following up and making sure that it's being effectively implemented. Don't assume that just because people say they understand what they're meant to be doing, that they're actually going to do it in the way that they should be. And then step 5 is, are you learning about change? Now, this is something that so many of us forget about, and it's particularly bad in management processes, because management processes are simply steps 1 to 4. They don't incorporate step 5, and they particularly don't incorporate step 5 moving back to step 2. It's very important in today's modern world, which is changing so quickly, to learn about change. And the faster you can learn about change, then the faster you can respond to it. So the point about step 5 is, are you learning about change? Are you listening to how the world is changing and then incorporating that into the planning activity? So in summary, we've learned about the following. We've learned that leaders need communication to achieve goals. This might seem simple, but it's an extremely important point. We're not communicating because it sounds nice or because we're trying to understand each other's feelings. Those are all important aspects, but the fundamental point of communication for a leader is to make sure that they and their team and their organization are moving forward to achieving their goals. In particular, and very specifically, the communication must flow around an effective control cycle. We're not communicating about random things. We're communicating about 5 fundamental activities: setting goals, creating plans, communicating the plans, implementing the plans, and learning about how the world has changed and incorporating that into the planning process. You need to be communicating about these 5 things. And that takes us to the final point. As a 21st century leader, it is your job to make sure that this communication is flowing. You need to be prioritizing your time to make sure the information is moving around your organization. You need to make sure that people are having the right conversations and that that information is being shared appropriately. That doesn't mean necessarily that you have to do everything yourself. It can be as much as about creating a culture of communication. But ultimately, it is up to you to make sure that communication and information flow in your organization to ensure that you have the control you need to achieve your goals.